the Bitcoin story is going to move too. Now, the other thing is these governments, they're not sitting there doing nothing. They're cutting interest rates, right? So from their perspective, they're about to go into massive deflation.
I'm happy to report that we've made substantial progress between the United States and China in these very important trade talks.
The next 90 days and then the next year after, I mean, this is looking pretty good. I think that means all crypto gets reevaluated. I think the SEC gets changed. I think money printing is going to continue, will go on. That'll be very good for Bitcoin. And I think we immediately jump to well above 100,000. I mean, 140,000, 180,000, something.
Fred Krueger envisions Bitcoin reaching unprecedented heights, predicting a price surge to over $2 million as institutional adoption accelerates. He points to the vast wealth in traditional finance, estimating that even a small percentage shifting into Bitcoin could multiply its market cap significantly. According to Krueger, Bitcoin's decentralized nature, finite supply, and growing institutional interest position it as a financial revolution in the making. Krueger also stresses the importance of regulatory changes to unlock Bitcoin's full potential. He advocates for reducing tax burdens on small Bitcoin transactions and eliminating KYC requirements for purchases, which he believes will simplify access and fuel adoption. Furthermore, he highlights how countries like the US could lead in Bitcoin innovation, using it as a strategic advantage in the global financial landscape. Ultimately, Krueger views Bitcoin not just as a speculative investment but as the future of money. He asserts that its current volatility is a natural maturation phase, offering a rare, transformative opportunity for early investors. His bold predictions challenge the perception of Bitcoin, urging individuals and institutions alike to recognize its potential before it becomes a mainstream financial cornerstone.
The numbers are just so big. We're going to a seven-figure Bitcoin price. That's what's happening. And now the amount of cash, the amount of assets that are in TradFi are so big. And I think people in Bitcoin fail to see this. This is the math that I think is really important. You have $100 trillion of assets in TradFi and $100 billion worth of assets that are deployed in a form that can be consumed by TradFi. 100 billion, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's 1/10 of 1%.
Yeah.
Okay, now, what's the chance that 1/10 of 1% goes to 1%? We'll say 100%. Yeah, it is. It is 100% chance that we are going to go from 1/10 of 1% to 1%. And we'll probably go from 1% to 5% ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe more. Well, that's a 10x in terms of money invested into this thing. Yeah. That means that Bitcoin price is going to go up 40x, roughly. Right? We're going to go from 1 trillion to 41 trillion in terms of market cap, which is to say about $2 million per Bitcoin. So you can see that the sheer math is just amazing, right? And what did I not include in that? The rest of the world, right? I didn't include China. I didn't include Europe. I didn't include any of that. I didn't include real estate. I didn't, so the numbers are just so big. The amount of cash, the amount of assets that are in TradFi are so big. And I think people in Bitcoin fail to see this. They're not used to these numbers. They haven't really analyzed these numbers. There's a tsunami of cash, a tsunami of money that will want to get into this asset, right? The big story here is asset allocation and just the size of the flows that we're looking at here. I think that's just amazing. And I think Bitcoiners they don't understand how big it is. They really don't. They just, and it's, to give you another example, there's $6 trillion in money markets sitting out there. $6 trillion.
That's crazy.
I mean, could we have 20% of that goes into Bitcoin? Sure. Why not? Without even a drop that comes from real estate or the QQQs or anything else, right? And this doesn't even include any future growth of the money supply.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm just saying, I cut down every single thing by 5x, and I'm still getting that this thing's going to north of 1 million very, very easily, right? And so I think this stuff's happening. This is the mega trend, and you don't need to be too clever when you have one of these mega trends. You just need to get on board, and that's I think the message. We're going to a 7-figure Bitcoin price. That's what's happening. And now either you can kind of like mentally get on board with that number. And if you do, you shouldn't have a 1% allocation to Bitcoin or 2% or even a 10%. Those numbers are too low. Fortunately, I'm fortunate that I kind of discovered this, roughly, 5 years ago. But it wasn't like my first introduction to Bitcoin. But I finally got the religion 5 years ago, and but even if you get the religion today, it's like we're still very early in this process. So people are going to look back and they're going to be like, how the hell did you get in Bitcoin in 2024? It's like, what a genius you were to buy at 72,000,
Fred Krueger envisions Bitcoin reaching over $2 million per coin, driven by institutional adoption and a reallocation of traditional finance asset. He sees Bitcoin's decentralized nature and limited supply as key to its potential, calling it the future of money and a transformative investment. Krueger also stresses the importance of regulatory changes, such as tax relief and simplified access, to unlock Bitcoin's full potential. He urges the U.S. to lead in Bitcoin innovation, positioning it as a global financial powerhouse.
So it's about $100 trillion total. That's the size of the U.S. TradFi market, right?
Yep.
So now let's sort of say, okay, how much of that 100 trillion, that is, investors like you or me, or also institutions like pension funds, et cetera, own, all these things. And a lot of it's not self-directed, right? So the advisors, who are advising on behalf of people, right? So it's 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It's 1/3 institutions, 1/3, directed investing, and then 1/3 self-directed, investing. And you ask yourself, of that $100 trillion pie, how much of it is currently allocated to Bitcoin? And your first instinct is to say, well, Bitcoin's $1 trillion, and a little bit more than $1 trillion, 1.4 trillion. So it's 1%, but it's not, because actually that's just the amount of money that's in Bitcoin as a whole, right? But if you look at the ETFs have roughly about 1 million Bitcoin right now, including Grayscale. Okay. And if you throw in, so it's about $70 billion worth of Bitcoin. Let's throw in MSTR, right? And you're getting roughly $100 billion, right? You probably can get 10x without very much effort at all with Bitcoin in the next 10 years. You know what I mean? You're going to get a 10x. So for you to take risks on something else, it's got to be pretty exceptional. I wouldn't throw darts at the wall and buy meme coins at all. Like, no point whatsoever.
Yeah.
Even if you have a little bit better chance than average of succeeding, it's still not worth it, because you've got just this amazing opportunity with Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well,
so I mean, I sort of tell people, if you should be 90, your allocation between Bitcoin and anything else should be 95% Bitcoin. If you want to play around and do some other stuff, that's fine. Look, I like art on Bitcoin. I'm all for it. So I think there are these niche markets, and everything's going to go to Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin could be a platform for a lot of things. But let's be honest, it's won these wars, right? It is won. The biggest barrier is probably legal, right? So the biggest thing is Bitcoin needs to be legal tender, which means that if I buy and sell Bitcoin, there's no tax on the transaction. I don't have to report that as buying some speculative commodity, right? It has to become legal tender, right? In El Salvador, it's legal tender now, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to report. If I buy Bitcoin, sell Bitcoin, doesn't matter, for US dollars, which is their second currency, right?
Yep.
So I think that's the first thing is ultimately, and there's steps along the way. So the first step would be, let's not have any tax requirements for some amount of, let's say, $20,000 worth of Bitcoin a year. You don't even have to report taxes on, That's the first thing, right? And then there's all other legal things like, getting rid of KYC to buy Bitcoin. We don't need to have that. Like, why do we need KYC to buy Bitcoin? Why do if you want to buy Bitcoin, you should just be able to buy Bitcoin. Like, it's you don't need KYC to go do most of the things you do in your life, and to put this, like, put yourself a passport, do this, turn this way, biometrics, and have your every single thing be in a giant computer somewhere, is not good, right? So I think we have to go through these phases of institutional adoption, and right now Bitcoin is treated like the enemy, and start treating it as this is actually could be really good for the U.S., right? So. And I think if we look at it that way, like, this is really good. We mine most of the Bitcoin in the U.S. We're earlier than most people. If we start adding Bitcoin, we create a reserve of Bitcoin, it'll be good. If we can be pioneers at Bitcoin, if we can be ahead of China at doing this, it'll be good, right? It's sort of like, do you want to be the last person to adopt the internet or AI? No, you don't. You want to be right there at the beginning, right?
Fred Krueger predicts Bitcoin's price will exceed $2 million, driven by institutional adoption and a shift from traditional finance. He highlights its limited supply and decentralized nature as key advantages and urges regulatory reforms to unlock its full potential. He believes early adoption by the U.S. could position it as a global leader in Bitcoin innovation, viewing the cryptocurrency as a transformative force in finance. Do you agree with Krueger's vision for Bitcoin's future? What challenges do you think could hinder Bitcoin's adoption? Let me know in the comments.